In this session, we're going to talk about a topic that has been around for a number of years already, but it has become even more relevant as we are emerging from the COVID-19 crisis, and that is the war for talent. Now, the term the war for talent itself has been coined by Stephen Hankin already in 1997. It has made its way into academia, and it basically describes the struggle companies have to fill positions with qualified, skilled employees and finding those highly talented employees. Now, as part of this session, I'm going to first take you through what the war for talent actually means by referring to some of the more recent survey data. Then we're going to talk about why Asia is affected particularly by this war for talent. And we're going to end the session by talking about what companies can do to basically fight the war for talent, to recruit talented employees, and also to retain their most talented employees. But let's start first by looking at some of the survey data. So the survey itself that we are referring to here is conducted on an annual basis by Manpower Group since 2010, and it's called the Global Talent Survey. The original survey had about 38,000 employers. So it's conducted among companies at the employer level. It covered 41 countries, and the geographic distribution was basically around the globe, 25% in the Americas, 50% in Europe, and 25% in Asia Pacific. Now, the most recent update is from 2021. So it was at the height of the crisis, of the COVID-19 crisis. There were significantly fewer companies, fewer employers involved, about 19,000 employers, but still across 42 countries. And with that sample size of 19,000, it is still quite a significant and relevant survey. Now, starting off with looking at the results from pre-crisis. So this is in 2018. Back in 2018, 45% of employers said they couldn't find the skills they needed. And for large organizations, it was standing at 67%, so quite significant. In terms of the countries, Japan led the countries with most difficulties, with 89% of Japanese employers saying that they can't find the skills that they were looking for. And it went through the ranks. The top 10 ended with Slovakia at 54%. On the other side, the countries with least difficulties, China was number one, with only 13% of employers saying that they have difficulties filling jobs. And then in the top 10, there were countries like France, for example, and Switzerland. Now, if we fast forward to 2021, so after the crisis or at the height of the crisis, the situation has changed quite significantly. So France, which was among the top 10 with the least difficulties previously, has now become the most difficult country to find skilled labor. Also Switzerland, which was among the best 10 countries, is now among the top 10 for the most difficulty. Also, what we can observe here is that among the top 10 countries with most difficulty, the differences are quite small now. So ranging from 80 to 88% of employers. So all of these top 10 countries have quite significant difficulty in filling the positions that they're looking for. On the countries with least difficulty, we see a similar trend. So China used to have 13% previously, now standing at 28% of employers saying that they have difficulty filling the jobs. And within the top 10, we even reach percentages up to 62%. So even the least difficult countries to fill roles and to find talent is still quite a significant challenge. So going up to 62% of employers saying they have difficulty filling the skills that they need. If you look at companies by size, we see a similar trend. So between 2018 and 2021, actually across all size of companies, the difficulty has increased. And the biggest increase can be observed with small companies and micro companies. So for small companies at the size of 10 to 49 employees, for example, in 2018, 45% of employers stated that they have difficulties filling jobs. In 2021, 3 years later, this number has gone up to 64%. And even more drastic, the number for micro companies from 32% to 63% within only 3 years. So basically doubling the level of difficulty of filling roles. Now, looking at the drivers behind the talent shortage, this is the result of the 2018 survey. So basically, lack of applicants was the biggest driver with 29%, followed by lack of experience, lacking the right hard skills, the required hard skills that were needed. Then the pay was actually expected higher than offered, and followed by a lack of soft skills, so human strengths. In this case, these were the top 5. Now, looking at Asia specifically, Manpower Group recently stopped reporting details on Asia separately, but this is the most recent survey. And what we see here is that hard skills and soft skills play an even higher role, especially soft skills with 28%. And among those soft skills, interpersonal skills, enthusiasm, teamwork, and flexibility were the highest ranked ones that caused difficulty for companies to fill. Now, the most recent survey doesn't look at the region specifically, but still has details by country and still covers that aspect of soft skills that are in demand. So if I may just highlight the top 3. Globally, if you look at the left column, accountability, reliability, and discipline ranks very prominently on number 1. The second is resilience, stress tolerance, and adaptability. And the third is initiative taking. So these are globally the top 3 soft skills that are in demand. Now, what is interesting here is that these soft skills vary quite a bit by country. So in the UK, for example, the UK resemble pretty much the global picture here, while China, the top 3 on a global scale, are actually not even making it among the top 3. Accountability, for example, only ranks number 6. And in the US, accountability, reliability, discipline ranks number 8. So 2 explanations here that I could imagine. One is definitely the difference in culture among the countries, probably valuing different soft skills differently. But I think the other aspect, specifically for the 2021 survey here, is also how countries handle the COVID-19 crisis. So, for example, the global picture might be determined by how people have to work from home, and therefore accountability, reliability, discipline ranks quite high there. And that was also the case for Europe, for example, and the UK here as an example, where work from home was quite the norm, at least from what I hear from my friends and colleagues. While in China, the government took a stance of no COVID and hard lockdowns for 2 or 3 weeks, followed by complete opening up of the economy, and therefore people returned to their workplace, and therefore this aspect of working from home might be less relevant in China. That's just my interpretation, but for sure, like the cultural differences obviously play a big role here as well in the country differences. Now, let's look briefly at what happened most recently and how this has evolved over time, and specifically since the crisis has basically subsided or economies have been opening up. What has changed with regards to the war for talent? Now, first of all, looking at the trend over time, we see that there's a significant step up over the past 10 years in the level of difficulty that companies have in filling jobs. So in 2011, 10 years ago, only 34% of employers reported that they have difficulties in filling jobs. This has more than doubled by now to 69% in 2021. And we see the trend, especially since 2018, 19, and then 21 going up quite significantly. Now, McKinsey has also picked this up, and in their latest, one of their latest reports, they have called this the Great Attrition. And basically, the McKinsey survey results have found that 40% of employees said that they are somewhat likely, at least somewhat likely, or very likely to leave their current job in the next 3 to 6 months. So 40% of employees are either somewhat likely or very likely to leave their job over the next 3 to 6 months. That's a very high number. Of course, it varies by sector, by industry, but you can see on the bottom here, the variation is not that large. And in terms of the employers, most of them experience greater turnover, and also a large number of employers expect this problem to continue or worsen over the next 6 months or so. And what is very remarkable and interesting here is that people are willing to leave their job even without having a new job. So 64% of respondents said they would be likely to leave their job even without a new job in hand. I think one aspect for this trend is that there are more and more remote work options now. So previously it was actually more difficult to find a new job. People might have to move cities, might have to move state, might have to move their families along. But with the work from home options or remote work options, this has become less of a challenge. So it is actually a little bit easier for people to move their jobs without actually having to relocate. Now, what is also very remarkable, and what this survey clearly shows, maybe a little bit difficult to see on the small screen here, is that employers don't fully understand why employees are leaving. So when we look at the reasons that employers gave for why they think that people are leaving, they talked about things like better jobs, employees being poached by other companies offering the ability to work remotely. But what employees say, and this is here on the left side highlighted in the bright blue fields, they said they don't feel valued by their organization. They say they don't feel valued by their manager. They say they don't feel that sense of belonging that they want to feel. So while employers assume that it's more on the hard side, on the maybe on the monetary, on the compensation side, or better offers that makes people leave, it is actually the soft side, and especially the coaching and the management of people that plays a much bigger role in the reason why people leave their jobs, even without having new jobs. Now, this trend has been around for a number of years, as I said, has been worsened most recently. And what we see, at least historically, it has been a much bigger challenge in Asia. So I want to cover briefly why is there a big challenge in Asia. So a number of reasons for the quite severe talent shortage, specifically for Asia. The first is macro reasons. So there's 3 reasons here. For once, the region has been growing quite rapidly. And therefore, the talent demand has been growing faster than the talent supply. So that has created shortages, obviously. Linked to this, the education system has not been able to keep up with the required number, but also the skills The need for skills has changed, and the universities have not changed fast enough to adapt for the new skills that are needed by employers. And finally, we see some demographic changes. So, for example, aging populations in some countries. For sure, we see the effect of the one-child policy in China. So all of this has actually created shortages, especially among the younger generation, and therefore there are more options for people as well. And that leads us to the next point, which is candidate-related reasons. So for sure, there's a shortage of leadership skills, and especially the ability to work in an international environment. So that's at least reported by the employers who are looking for talent. The second one is brain drain. So that refers to people going to study overseas, but then deciding not to come back to their home countries, but staying, for example, in the US or in Europe because they get higher salaries there and better opportunities. But then there's also higher demands. Some of the articles call it a spoiledness of the younger generation, but definitely higher demands by the younger generation who are now faced with less unemployment and more options also as a consequence of the demographic changes. Furthermore, there are company-related reasons, and these are really homemade problems for the companies. So one is poor candidate engagement. So many candidates are actually lost in the process. Candidates feel that the recruiting process is too transactional, not personal enough. Linked to this also, the recruitment process is often slow, inefficient, sometimes taking 4 weeks or much longer. The process integrity, so the selection process itself and the integrity is unsatisfactory. So some candidates fall through the cracks, who shouldn't be hired and they are hired or don't meet the skills. So there's high turnover afterwards, and some skilled candidates might not be hired because there's too stringent screening. Similarly, especially in Asia, there is a lack of innovative staffing models, for example, freelancers, joint ventures. This is rather rare still in the region. And hiring approaches are often very labor intensive, cost intensive, and time intensive, for example, manual screening. And of course, there are also circumstantial reasons. So there's high staff turnover, often up to 30% per year, and that leads to a significantly higher cost of employment. And we see a lot of job jumpers as well. So they change their job every 2 years. And that is also a trend that we see maybe in Asia much more than in Europe and the US, for example. Now, what can companies do to address this shortage? So we first have to look at recruiting and what companies can do to recruit the right talent. So one lever that companies can pull, and that is typically, if you ask HR managers and employers, the first lever that companies think about is to pay higher wages. So salaries have increased quite significantly, especially in HR. So for example, here an HR director in Shanghai has higher salary levels than a CFO in Thailand, for example, quite significantly higher. So companies have reacted and offer higher wages to recruit talent. A second lever that has been mentioned by recruiters is to welcome the boomerangers. Now, what does that mean? Basically making it easy for former employees to come back to their old jobs. So basically allowing people to go out, gather experience elsewhere. But then when employees want to come back to the company that they had worked for previously, making it easy for them, welcoming them back and integrating them back into the company. The third, and companies are getting much more open-minded about this one, is called a teachable fit. So basically not looking for the perfect match in terms of hard skills and soft skills, but rather look for the right soft skills, so for the right attitude and aptitude to grow and develop, rather than bringing all the required skill set with them already. And that is true, for example, in consulting, that is particularly true. The fourth aspect, what many companies are doing now, is to invest in their brand and focus on employer branding. Number 5 is that many companies now also in Asia are looking for the right candidates globally. So they expand the search beyond the traditional local or regional boundaries. The boom of executive search firms, or colloquially called headhunters, is also something that has come to Asia. So many companies are now engaging those search firms to find the right candidates with the specific skills. Another trend also is career events. So many companies are actually going now on campus and also offering quite attractive events to engage potential employees early on and recruit them right away from campus. And that also includes the launch of special talent programs like young entrepreneur programs. McKinsey's consulting fellowship program is an example here, or many young talent programs or management trainee programs are quite common now, which hasn't been the case like 5 or 10 years ago, especially here in Asia. Now, some facts from the recent survey. So the 4 areas that have changed in recent years is that companies, first of all, on the positive side, adjust much more the education experience requirements. So they are willing to let go of the requirements and, as I mentioned earlier, like hire the right fit and the right attitude and aptitude rather than the perfect skill set. And also the second aspect here is the offering of additional perks and benefits. So these have gone up quite significantly. On the other side, recruiting from outside the traditional talent pool has actually dropped, and also outsourcing has dropped quite a bit. Now, this was talking about recruiting the right talent. The thing is, recruiting is good, but it still doesn't address one of the root causes of the issue, which is the high turnover. So one aspect that we have to look at for companies is definitely how to retain their employees. Why is it so much of a big deal? Because the cost of employee turnover is quite significant. So for an employee earning $8 per hour, so quite low paid job, the cost of turnover are $5,500 per role or per position. Yeah, and this comes from the replacement cost, the training cost, the separation cost potentially, and also the cost, the opportunity losses from the role being unfilled for a certain amount of time. And before we go into the details of what companies can do, a few insights here from a recent survey, and it pretty much reflects also the most recent data that we have post-COVID. So candidates complain, or employees complain, that senior managers don't spend enough high-quality time with them. They don't spend enough high-quality time on talent management. Also, some cultural issues are listed here, pretty much on the top of the ranks. So, for example, a silo organization that does not share resources, that does not encourage constructive collaboration. Also, line managers who are not sufficiently committed to people development. So all of these are more like on the soft side and can be avoided. Now, apart from that, here are some of the actions that companies take to retain talent. Among those are training and development, the mentoring system, for example, which addresses some of the points mentioned on the previous page, personal development plans. On the monetary side, stock options are becoming more common now. Also, on the negative side, delayed bonus payments. So what is meant by this is that instead of paying the bonus immediately, it is delayed either by some month or in some companies even by another year. And that makes employees stay because they feel they have worked for their bonus, so they might stay around until the bonus comes out. So that is also quite a negative measure, but potentially an effective measure to reduced turnover, healthcare packages, employee networks, also the provision of gadgets, of electronic equipment is becoming increasingly relevant. Now, flexible working hours ranks on number 9 here. Staff rotation to new roles. And then on a more softer side, focus on the work-life balance, on family, and having a more fashionable office. So all of these are measures that companies take to retain talent within their firms. Now, finally, I want to share what Manpower Group suggested. Basically, they suggest companies to pull 4 levers. The first one is to build. And that means to build internally, invest in learning and development, and grow the talent pipeline internally. The second lever is to buy, and that refers to the external market. So finding the right talent in the market and hiring that talent in that cannot be built in-house in the required time frame. Now, these are the traditional levers. The third one is to borrow, and that means to cultivate communities of talent outside the organization, for example, including like part-time, freelance, contractors, temporary workers that can be brought in at certain peak times, so that there's a community of people that are available to work with the company and fill roles either temporary or even on a full-time or in a continual basis. And the fourth element is to bridge. So that to bridge means to help people move on and move up into new roles, but within the organization, but it also means to help people move on into roles outside the organization, and then talking about the boomerangers later on, bringing them back, staying in touch and bringing them back in. And also, of course, building a bridge for people who had already left the organization to come back to the organization. So this build, buy, borrow, and bridge strategy is the recommended solution from Manpower Group. One thing is for sure, this shortage of talent is something that companies have to address, that companies will struggle with, and that will be around for a while. Thank you so much for watching this video.